On a September morning in 1871, in the high grass country of the Arizona Territory, a cowgirl named June McKay walked into her own barn and found a dying man in the straw. He was Apache. He was young, and he was soaked in blood from the hip down, and he had dragged himself 20 feet from the door to the far stall, leaving a dark road behind him. In his hand was a knife. He could not lift it. He looked up at her, and she looked down at him, and the rifle in her hands weighed more in that moment than it had ever weighed in her life. Every rule of that valley, every fear her neighbors traded over their fences, every poster on the wall of the stage station, all of it said the same thing: ride to town. Fetch the soldiers. Let it be somebody else's morning. June McKay did not ride to town. What she did instead took 1 year to finish, cost her nearly everything she owned, and ended at a winter fire where a people who had every reason to hate her name spoke it, out loud, as one of their own. The Army wrote 2 reports about that year and got both of them wrong. The town of Aldergate still argues about it. I went looking for how this could have happened, and the answer is that it did not start in the barn. It started months earlier, in 2 different worlds, beside 2 different fires, in 2 lives that were being pushed toward each other by everything around them. A horsewoman losing her ranch 1 head at a time, a warrior losing his country 1 treaty at a time. To understand that morning in the straw, you need both fires. So we will sit at both. Stay until first snow. It ends better than you fear. June McKay was 28 years old, and she had been the whole of the 2 Springs outfit for 3 years, ever since her father coughed his last winter away in the front room. Her mother was a photograph on the mantle. Her brother was a name on a stone at Shiloh, back east where the grass was soft. What Angus McKay had left his daughter was 60 horses, 2 good springs in a thirsty land, a bill of sale for every animal on the place, and a piece of advice he made her repeat back to him near the end: water and patience, girl. In this country, whoever keeps both keeps everything. She kept both. It was not enough. The trouble had a name, and the name was Harlan Voss. He ran cattle on 40 times her acreage, banked in 3 towns, and had decided, with the calm appetite of a big fish, that 2 springs belonged inside his fence line. He had offered to buy her out twice, at half worth. She had refused twice, politely. After the second refusal, things began to happen to June McKay. Her south spring was fouled with a dead cow she did not own. Her hay contract in Aldergate dried up with no explanation, and her horses began to vanish, 1 and 2 at a time, off the far pastures, always in the dark of the moon, always without tracks enough to follow. The town called it Apache raiding. It was a comfortable explanation. It was the explanation printed by the Aldergate paper, repeated at the feed store, and sworn to by the men who drank at Voss's table. June was not so sure. She had cut the sign herself where her best mare disappeared, and the pony tracks she found were shod. Apache raiders did not ride shod horses. Cowhands did. She said so, once, out loud, at the feed store. The talk stopped like a snapped fiddle string. Voss's foreman, a wide man named Dutch Kern, smiled at her from the doorway and said the desert was a dangerous place for a woman alone with opinions. That night she sat by her stove with her father's rifle across her knees and did the arithmetic of her life. 51 horses left, 2 springs, 1 woman. She was not afraid of work, and she was not afraid of Dutch Kern, not exactly. What frightened her was quieter than that. It was the idea that a person could do everything right, keep the water and keep the patience, and still be eaten slowly by a bigger fish, while the whole town nodded along and blamed it on the Apache. Remember that anger. It matters later, in the barn. 40 miles south, in a fold of the Dragoon Mountains that white maps called empty, a man named Kuruk sat at a different fire and did different arithmetic. Kuruk was 30. He was Chokonen, of the people the settlers lumped together as Apache, and he had spent his whole life watching his world be surveyed, promised, and taken. His father had ridden with the Great Ones in the years when the people were feared from river to river. His father was gone now. So was the world he had ridden through. What remained was a band of 41 souls, more of them children and grandmothers than warriors, camped high in the rocks, because high in the rocks was the only place the wagons did not come. There was talk that winter of a peace, a paper peace, a reservation with rations and an agent. Some of the older men wanted it, because the children were thin. Some of the younger men would rather die than count their lives out in agency beef. Kuruk stood in the middle, and the middle was the loneliest ground in the territory. Geronimo, who would carry the last of that fight longest, once said, "I was born on the prairies, where the wind blew free, and there was nothing to break the light of the sun." Kuruk had been born under that same unbroken light. His own sons, if he ever had sons, would be born under a ration ledger. He knew it the way you know rain is coming. Knowing did not stop the sky. That autumn, Kuruk's task was horses. Without horses, the band could not move, and a band that could not move was a band waiting to be caught. So he rode north with 2 companions, quiet as smoke, to trade for mounts with the Mexican families along the river who still dealt fairly, and to avoid the places where the bluecoats patrolled. He knew of the woman at 2 Springs. Everyone in that country knew of her, the red-haired one who rode like a man and shot hawks off the wing, who ran horses her father had bred out of the best blood in Sonora. Twice that autumn, moving at night, Kuruk had crossed the tracks of shod ponies, pushing stolen McKay stock south toward the border, and he had read the sign correctly, because unlike the Aldergate newspaper, he could read. White men were stealing the white woman's horses and hanging the theft on his people. Every stolen mare made the soldiers hotter, and every hot soldier made the peace talk harder, and every stumble in the peace talk put his 41 souls closer to a cold grave in the rocks. So no, it was not kindness that first pointed Kuruk toward 2 Springs. It was strategy. He meant to catch the thieves at their work and leave them, and the truth, where the army could not miss either one. It went wrong on a night in late September, in a dry wash 3 miles from June McKay's barn. Dutch Kern and 3 riders came for the gray herd in the dark of the moon, the way they always did. They found Kuruk waiting. What Kuruk had not counted on was the 4th rider, the one hanging back with a repeating rifle, the one he did not see until the wash lit up with muzzle flash. Kuruk's 2 companions scattered the stolen horses south, as planned, drawing the riders after them, as planned. Kuruk took a bullet through the hip, which was not planned. He lost his pony a mile later. He knew what a hip wound meant on foot in that country. It meant you picked the direction of your death. South was 40 miles of desert to his people. East was Aldergate and a rope, and north, 3 miles, sat a barn he had scouted twice, with water, with straw, on the land of the woman whose horses he had been trying to save. He crawled the last half-mile. The sky was going gray when he pulled the barn door shut behind him, and the last thing he thought, before the dark took him, was that his grandmother's stories had never once mentioned this kind of ending. Bleeding out in a white woman's straw, 3 miles from anywhere, for a herd that was not even his. The dark did not take him all the way. It left him just enough to hear boots on the dirt floor, and to see the rifle, and above the rifle, a face. Now you are caught up. Now the 2 fires are one story, and the story is standing in the barn door with a decision to make. June McKay saw 4 things in the first 3 seconds. Apache, blood, a knife the man could not lift, and his eyes, which were not begging, because he was past begging, but were doing something that undid her without her permission. They were apologizing. To the straw, maybe. For the mess. She thought about her neighbors. She thought about the soldiers at the crossing, and the poster at the stage station, and the word the newspaper used for men like this one. Then she thought about shod pony tracks, and a town that had lied to her face for a year, while a big fish swallowed her ranch, one horse at a time, and she discovered that her trust in that town's word had bled out somewhere over the past 12 months, quietly, the way he was bleeding out now. June McKay put the rifle against the wall. "You're in my barn," she said, kneeling. "That makes you my trouble. Hold still." She got the bullet out with fence pliers boiled in a coffee pot, because it was what she had. He never made a sound. She packed the wound the way her father had taught her after a horse wreck in '66, and she wintered him in the grain room like a secret. And if you have never kept a secret from an entire territory, I can tell you it weighs about the same as a wagon. He woke on the third day, gray as ash, and watched her a long time. "Why?" he asked, in English, which surprised her. June went on grinding coffee. "Somebody's been stealing my horses and blaming your people," she said. "I figure the man who got shot in my wash on the same night my grays went south knows the truth of it. Can't hang a man for that. Can't let him die of it either." She looked over at him. "And I don't much care for the company I'd be agreeing with if I turned you in." Kuruk was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Shod horses, 4 riders. The wide one gives the orders." "Dutch Kern," June said, and the name tasted like iron. "That wide one works for Harlan Voss. I don't know these names." "You will," she said. "They're the reason both of us are poor." He should have healed in 3 weeks and gone. He stayed 9, and the 9 weeks were nobody's plan. First, the wound soured, and she fought a fever with him for 6 days. Wet cloths, and willow bark, and language she had learned from mule skinners. Then the early snow closed the passes south, and a man half-healed does not cross 40 winter miles of open country, with soldiers riding the line of it. So they were stuck with each other, and something happened in that barn that neither of them ever fully explained to the people who later demanded explanations. They talked. He mended her harness while he healed, hands quick and exact, and told her, in pieces, about the Dragoons, about his 41 souls, about a boyhood spent under the unbroken light. She told him about Shiloh and the stone with her brother's name, about water and patience, about doing everything right and being eaten anyway. He taught her the sign for horse thief. She taught him to play checkers, and lost 4 games out of 5, and accused him of hustling her, and he smiled for the first time, and the barn got strangely warm for a moment for December. Twice riders came up her lane, and twice she stood on her porch with the rifle loose in her arm, and her heart going like a trapped bird, and talked pleasant nothings until they left. One of those riders was Dutch Kern himself, come to ask, wide and smiling, whether a woman alone had any trouble she needed help with this winter. "None I can't shoot," June said, and smiled back, and Kern laughed and rode off, and in the grain room behind her, a knife went quietly back into its sheath. "Here is the plain truth of what grew in that barn, and I will not dress it up in ribbons. Nobody said the word love that winter. Some things live a long time before anyone names them, the way a spring runs under rock a whole valley before it dares come up into the light. If you want to know when it truly began, the people who study such things would point you to Christmas Eve, and a checkerboard, and a piece of red flannel." June had ridden to Aldergate the week before for supplies, and in the general store, without letting herself think about it too hard, she had bought a yard of red flannel and a sack of pipe tobacco, though no one at Two Springs smoked a pipe. She told the storekeeper the flannel was for a quilt. The storekeeper told his wife it was a shame. A young woman going strange out there all alone, buying tobacco for a dead father. On Christmas Eve, she brought supper out to the grain room, beans and biscuits, and the last of the dried apples stewed soft, and the flannel, folded, and the tobacco on top of it. She set them down, and could not for the life of her think of anything to say, so she said it was cold, which it was. Kuruk looked at the gifts for a long moment. Then he reached into the straw beside his bedroll and brought out a horsehair rope, and it was not an ordinary rope. It was braided in 4 colors, from the tails of her own remuda. Patient work, weeks of it, done in secret, with a wounded man's endless hours. A mecate, finer than anything sold between Tucson and Santa Fe. For the gray filly, he said, she pulls left because your rope is stiff. This one talks quieter. June McKay had not cried since her father's funeral. She did not cry now either, but it was a near thing, and she had to go check on a horse that did not need checking. The weeks after that had a rhythm to them. Morning chores and his slow circuits of the barn as the hip knitted, a little farther each day. Checkers at noon, where she now lost 5 games out of 5, and suspected she had been winning that first week only as charity. And in the evenings, talk, real talk, the kind that surprises the people doing the talking. She told him about the letter that came after Shiloh, and how her father read it standing up, and then went out and split wood for 4 hours in the rain. He told her about his sister, gone 11 years now, taken in a raid by scalp hunters, who were paid by the head and did not trouble themselves about whose head. He said it flat and quiet, the way men say things that are not flat or quiet at all. She understood then why he had learned English, and why he watched every white face the way she watched summer clouds, reckoning which ones carried hail. Not you, he added after a silence. You I watched 2 days only. What changed on the 2nd day? You argued with your mule, Kuruk said, out loud. A liar does not argue with a mule. There is no profit in it. She laughed until she had to sit down on a hay bale, and he watched her laugh, and the barn got warm again, and both of them noticed, and neither of them said so. Once, in January, it nearly ended. Widow Greer, from the next section over, came calling with a crock of preserves, and walked halfway to the barn before June cut her off. And Mrs. Greer, who had buried 3 husbands and missed very little, looked at the 2 supper plates drying on the rack and the 4-color mecate hanging by the door, and said nothing at all. She said nothing at all so loudly that June did not sleep that night. But Mrs. Greer, it turned out, had her own accounts to settle. Voss had squeezed her off her east pasture the year her 2nd husband died. She stopped by again a week later, left a ham, and said, apropos of nothing, that in her experience, the law in this county worked about as well as a wax kettle, and that a woman did right to make her own arrangements. Then she patted June's hand and drove off. It was the closest thing to a blessing that winter would offer, and June took it as one. What June could not see, and what Kuruk carried alone all that winter, was the argument waiting for him in the Dragoons. When he finally went south in February, healed enough to sit a horse all night, he did not go home to a hero's fire. He went home to his brother. Itza was younger by 4 years and harder by 10. He had been leading in Kuruk's absence, and he had heard, through the strange fast channels by which news moves through open country, roughly where his brother had wintered, in whose barn, on whose charity. The council fire that night was not kind. Itza spoke first and longest. A white woman's straw, he said, had softened his brother's memory. Had Kuruk forgotten whose horses now grazed on the people's old pastures? Had he forgotten their sister? The whites were one animal with many mouths, Itza said, and a man who fed one mouth should not be surprised when a different mouth took his hand off at the wrist. The old men listened, The grandmothers listened harder. When it was Kuruk's turn, he did not defend the woman. He knew better than to try. He talked instead about horses and arithmetic. The band had 19 ponies and needed 40. The peace paper, if it came, would let them keep what they could prove was theirs, and proof, in the white world, was ink. He had spent a winter learning exactly how ink worked, he said, from a woman who owned a paper for every horse on her land. Papers that had held off a rich man's greed for 3 years, where rifles would have failed in one night. "The wind is changing," Kuruk said. "We can be under a roof of paper when the storm comes, or under the open sky. I have seen what happens under the open sky." Then the oldest grandmother, whose name meant walks with morning, and whose word could end any council, asked one question. "This woman, when she found you bleeding in her straw, what did she put down first, the rifle or her fear?" "The rifle," Kuruk said. "The fear she kept. She worked around it." The old woman nodded slowly, as if a scale had settled. "Then she is not a mouth," she said. "She is a hand. Take 6 men and go settle your debt. A people that cannot pay its debts is poor, in the only way that matters." That is how the help came to be at the border pens in March. Not sentiment. A debt, weighed at a fire by an old woman, and paid in full. Itza rode along. It should be recorded that he never once apologized, and that 11 years later, at a horse race at 2 Springs, he lost his best blanket, betting against a McKay gray, ridden by his own niece, and paid up laughing. Some wounds heal crooked, they heal. In February, healed and hard again, Kuruk went south in the night, and June McKay woke to an empty grain room and told herself firmly that this was the natural end of it, and burned the breakfast she then did not eat. He came back 11 days later, which no one, least of all June, expected. He came back with 2 of his companions, and with something better than horses. He came back with knowledge. The stolen stock, 2 winters of it, hers and half the county's, was being held and rebranded in pens at a border trading post, sold south under running iron brands, and the tally book of that operation was kept by a bought Mexican broker who was getting nervous about his neck. Kuruk had seen the pens. He had counted 40-odd head wearing what used to be the McKay brand, and he had learned the date of the next drive south, in March, when Dutch Kern and his riders would come down personally with the spring gather of other people's animals. "You can't testify," June said, thinking it through. "No court here will seat you, and if I ride to the army with a story about my Apache friend, they'll ask questions about the grain room I can't answer." "Then we do not testify," Kuruk said. "We arrange for the truth to be standing in the road." What they arranged took 3 weeks, and every relationship either of them had. It worked like this. June rode to Camp Bowie, alone, a respectable ranchwoman with a complaint, and told the captain there she had located her stolen horses at the border pens, and that the thieves would drive them south on the 2nd week of March, and that she had this from a trading post source she declined to name. The captain, who was under pressure from the Peace Commission to prove that not every theft in the territory was an Apache theft, found this extremely interesting. Meanwhile, Kuruk's people did what they had always done better than any army in the world. They watched, and they moved things without being seen. On the night before the drive, the gate of the border pens developed a mysterious failure, and 40 rebranded horses drifted, gently, unhurried, back north along the very road where a cavalry patrol just happened to be riding at dawn, with June McKay as guide. Dutch Kern and his riders came after the drifting herd at first light, running irons still in their saddlebags, and rode straight into the patrol. The horses, the brands, the widow, and the nervous broker, whom the captain had scooped up at the post the night before, and who could not talk fast enough. The Army report called it a fortunate coincidence of patrol timing. The Aldergate paper called it shocking. Harlan Voss called it nothing at all, because Kern offered the choice between hanging alone and explaining who paid him, explained at great length, and by summer, Voss was explaining too, to a territorial judge, and Two Springs was safe, and half the county owed its horses back to a source the newspaper never once guessed. The town asked June, over and over, how she had known where to look. She said a friend told her. They asked what friend. She said, the kind this town doesn't deserve, and bought her supplies, and rode home. The peace came that autumn, such as it was. Kuruk's band came down out of the Dragoons to a reservation stretch of river country, thin land, but land, with their horses, because a certain cowgirl had sworn before the agent, with a bill of sale in her hand and her chin set, that 30 of the ponies in that band carried her brand and were on loan exactly as long as she said so. It was a lie of paper and a truth of the heart, and the agent, who was drowning in worse lies daily, chose not to fight it. At the first snow, they sent for her. She rode south, with the wind at her back, and was met at the edge of the camp by children who already knew her horse. That evening, at the fire, in front of 41 souls, an old woman whose word outweighed any warrior's took June McKay's hands and gave her a name in the Chokanen tongue. Kuruk would only ever translate it as keeps the gate open. The people said her name, one voice after another, all around the fire, and the cowgirl who had buried her whole family and been all alone in the world for 3 years stood in the firelight and let the tears come. You are wondering about the two of them. Everyone always wonders about the two of them. They married in the spring, twice. Once at the camp, in the old way, with horses given and a blanket around 2 sets of shoulders. Once on the porch at Two Springs, before a circuit preacher who was either braver or more nearsighted than his colleagues, and asked no questions. There were plenty in Aldergate who never forgave it. There were more, as the years went by, who noticed that the McKay Kuruk horses were the best in the territory, that the ranch employed hands from both sides of a line other people insisted on, and that the couple at Two Springs seemed, in an inconvenient way, happy. They raised horses, and in time, 3 children under that unbroken light. The spring never failed. The gate never closed. Her father had told her that whoever keeps water and patience keeps everything. June kept both, and kept them wide open, and in the end that was the whole difference. The valley had plenty of water. What it had been missing was somebody patient enough to share it. One more thing, because it is the detail I keep coming back to. Years later, when the ranch house at Two Springs was rebuilt bigger, June hung 3 things on the wall of the front room. Her father's rifle, which by then had not been fired in a decade. The 4-color Mekate, retired from work and soft with age. And between them, in a plain frame, a page of paper. It was not a marriage paper or a land deed. It was a bill of sale, made out in her own careful hand, recording the loan of 30 horses to a band of 41 souls, signed by an Indian agent who had chosen mercy over tidiness on a cold afternoon. Visitors would ask about the rifle. Her children would tell them the real treasure was the paper, because the paper was the door everything else had walked through. Water and patience, their mother would say, from her chair by the window, and a gate you are not too proud to open. The fire in the Dragoons is out these 150 years. The fire at Two Springs, folks in that valley will tell you, never quite went out at all. There are more stories like this one, complete from first hoofbeat to last, waiting for you on the Cowgirl Chronicles. Ride along with the next one. The fire is already lit.